Regular.
Regular.
I heard something else. Okay. Congress over the summer when they were really sort of ramping up the discussion. Alrighty then. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of AutoBlack. I am one of your hosts. My name is Robert, and as always, I got my friends with me. We got Jamar,
What you
we
do,
got
baby?
Perla,
Oh, we not doing the. You gotta give me time to do my ad lib, Rob.
we
Yikes.
got Jamar, we got Perla,
Hi.
we got X,
How you doing?
and Whitney decided that she want to be with other people that she find a little bit more interesting. So she's not here today, but hopefully she'll come back and join us on the stoop.
She
Uh,
better come back. Since
if
I feel like it's a little imbalanced for me right now.
this is your first time joining us, welcome to your new favorite podcast. Auto Black is a podcast in which five sometimes, but now four Black architects get on here and we just talk about whatever we want. We talk about politics, we talk about culture, we talk about design, and we do it through the lens of Black architects. So welcome to the show. What's up, everybody? How y'all feeling?
Living the dream, baby.
Good.
Perla, how you feeling?
Pretty good. I'm pretty good,
All right,
just a
X, how you
little-
feeling?
How dare you?
Give her the middle child treatment.
We just started and you're already giving me the smoke.
Yeah, it's a little bit of an unusual recording schedule for us. We're actually recording on a weekday after a long day of work, so it's a little bit different. So I see Jamar still bringing the energy. He still got the smoke.
I got a bad time at 7, so time to go to bed.
They always say the devil never rests, so
We can continue. Why is Whitney not here? Perla, switch places, please. See yourself to the door. It's gonna be a great episode, everybody. Great.
No, you deserve this. You deserve the smoke. Okay. I'm on guard. I gotta protect myself.
Listen, is this what it's going to be this whole episode? You two going back and forth?
Apology in advance if it is.
I'm backing down. Lies. Psych. You thought.
Yeah. Hey, but we do actually have a pretty dope conversation that we have on plan. I think as you all know, it feels like there's always something in the news cycle about the cost of living. Inflation is something that's still very much in the minds of a lot of people, especially as we're heading into a contentious election cycle. And with that, like the cost of housing is something that is always seems to as well accompany the news in terms of affordability. So I thought it would be interesting for us as architects, as people who are in the built environment and in the building industry, to
Designers.
kind of lay our own sort of take on it, and just kind of have like a general discussion on it, and more specifically, I think there's a lot of factors that go into why the price of housing is so expensive, from a macroeconomics, microeconomics, from the cost of construction, the shortage of labor, I mean, to even the immigration policies in this country that is the reason why there's such a shortage of laborers in the construction industry. But one of the things that I think often get overlooked is some of the political or pseudo political concepts or groups that come into play, such as, and really the one that I want to kind of highlight is just the idea of NIMBYism, not in my backyard, and how these groups tend to hold a lot of power locally, and especially how they're able to to use things like the zoning code as a mechanism to enforce their power. So I thought that would be kind of an interesting way for us to dive into the topic. But before we get too into the details, Jamar, as our resident urban design expert, can you just kind of, for our listeners who may not be familiar, can you just kind of give like a brief explanation of one, what is zoning codes and like why do we need them and like why do they exist? But then also kind of give an explanation of like what NIMBYism is too.
Bro, you just gave me a whole like essay to talk about. You said, "Hey, point A on question one, I want you to respond to this," and then
Is this not what you do?
no,
Aren't
I'm an
you an urban
architect. I
designer?
haven't done urban design since 2020. No, 2019. That's when I got my urban design degree. Where guess what? We don't use it because architects do everything. So I'm a nobody. I'm a nothing. I wasted a year of my life doing urban design. So there you go. You want to know what zoning is? Ask an architect. As an architect, actually, correction, as a potential architect. So basically, zoning is what you basically zoning is about land use, right? And zoning is where they try to basically have things that are like zoned together. So it allows you to create different levels of density within the same type of zoning. So you have residential zoning, you have commercial, office, you have institutional, all these different types of zoning areas. But usually they're not mixed. There's usually not a mix of zoning. At least historically there hasn't been, but now there's a push to have mixed use zoning. So you can start to have a palimpsest, as we would say in architecture school, of uses within a block or an excuse me, a residential area or within an area of a city. NIMBYism is people who don't want to have anything next to them besides whatever they deem as, I guess, feasible or like what basically what something that they agree with. Because you never say no to something that you agree with, but if it's something that you don't see the value or, like I said, agree with, you would usually say no. So NIMBYism is not in my backyard. And there's the inverse of that, which is YIMBYism, which is yes in my backyard, which means you are for whatever project or program that is planned for that same plot of land or area. Is that suffice, Rob?
No, that's actually a very good explanation. Very well said, sir. And what
Boo.
I'd also like to
No.
add within residential, you have like different levels of residential. So you'd have like single family, multifamily, and then you could have like mixed use also with that residential. And then even in multifamily, it's different levels. So you have low density, high density, and then yeah, medium density. Yeah, so it gets a little bit more complicated when residential is introduced.
Proves my point when you
yeah,
talk about architects trying to speak for urban designers. Exactly. You're right, X. Congrats.
but but I mean you do bring up a valid point, right? Because we're the ones who are actually designing and detailing the built environment, but you have urban planners who may not necessarily have any their origin story might not necessarily begin in architecture school, so they have a different understanding of space, and they're really only designing at a two-dimensional level, and they're the ones who are setting the zoning codes, the zoning ordinances, distributing the land uses, and they're not necessarily concerned about the look and feel, the quality. It has to do with the segregation of uses, and I mean, on one hand, it makes sense, right? Because you don't want a strip club next to a school,
Oh,
but then like but like X said, it kind of goes into another level where where housing is sort of lumped together. You don't necessarily have a mix of retail or even a mix of housing types, and it it to me it's actually one of the things that has sort of exacerbated the affordability issue because it makes it harder for developers, even those who have very good intentions of building who want to build affordable housing or even want to build moderately priced housing. But when you have a group of people who are opposed to any type of development, then you begin to isolate, and then you begin to manufacture the supply. So even though there's a high demand for housing, you are manufacturing or manipulating the supply, thereby making the cost of housing higher.
Well, to kind of jump in that and on that point, so in a large majority of major American cities and even the suburbs of major American cities, a lot of the land is zoned for single family use. So a lot of you can't really have a lot of multifamily housing in a lot of American cities, and that's kind of changing in certain parts. But yeah, most areas you can only really do single family housing, and that's really the only type, at least in the U.S.
Well, that begs the question: are those who are for NIMBYism or YIMBYism, are they to blame if the zoning laws were already in place? Like if they're already used to expecting some sort of quality or some sort of environment around where they live because of the laws in place, and over time they just want to adapt that for themselves and for their future in terms of property values and all this other stuff. Can you blame those people who are for or against NIMBYism?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think it's a yes and no, because you understand the need of a homeowner to protect their largest investment and to ensure that the investment uh, is multiplied and augmented upward over time. And but at the same time, I think there's this false notion that anything that is different than what's already there, and
Mm,
also this idea that multifamily housing in general brings in a different, is associated with a certain class
right,
of people,
right,
especially
yeah,
when you start talking about affordable housing. And
right,
I was about to say yeah. I was about to say
municipalities,
definitely be
most
specific about that.
municipalities, yeah,
yeah,
and most municipalities are going to require some type of affordability aspect, especially as it relates to gaining additional density. So I think that there's this false notion that anything that is different will bring in a certain type of people, will then affect the value of a home, which I think is a fabricated argument, not really based in much.
So one thing I
yeah.
always, oh, what were you gonna say, Perla?
Oh no, I was just saying, I'm just curious.
So one thing that's always interesting, and I know we've all kind of dealt with this at some level of our career, or at some point in our career. But like the first thing that people talk about when you bring up like multifamily structures is like, all right, where are we gonna park? Like traffic's gonna get so much worse in my neighborhood. I'm like, so I'm currently working on a project in a undisclosed location, but it's in Virginia, bordering DC. And one of the things that people always talk about is like, where are we going to park? Where are we going to park? How are we going to park our cars? And if you go down that street at any point in time, there's literally no cars on the street. And it has street parking. But they're always like, where are we going
Mm-hmm.
to park? I'm like, you can park on the street now. Like, a denser project won't hurt your parking, you know?
Hmm.
And another thing that also kind of dictates parking in cars is obviously also the parking counts. A certain
Hmm.
percentage of a project or whatever, depending on how the jurisdiction goes about it, you have to, let's say like for each bedroom, you have to have point 0.5 cars or something like that.
Hmm.
So that also affects how many cars can be parked in the space, and then you go into underground parking and all that other stuff.
Hmm.
But and underground parking is more expensive versus street, surface level parking.
So I mean, and that's really a lot of that is dictated and mandated by zoning. And what one thing, so let me ask you a question off the top of your head: how much do you think it costs uh to build one parking space? Like, typically when you do a development, you have a total cost of the development, and then if it's multifamily, you have like a per unit cost. So $100 million project is costing you X amount per unit to build. What do you think is a typical per cost to build parking, surface
Underground?
and structured?
You mean structured mean underground or
Or
structured?
like park,
Underground,
parking
or
garage.
parking garage.
Do you
Yeah,
have the answer, Rob?
Well, underground is around 20,000. I know that it's around there
yeah, I feel like it's
per
about
What
right.
did
space.
you just say?
Isn't it around 20,000 per space?
Yeah. Well, it depends on the area. It could be 20 to 50,000, depending on obviously the land cost.
What's surface? What's that price?
I would think about 10,000 per
That's
space.
wild. Just the paint. Just the paint
Oh,
alone.
wow.
And what people don't realize though, so there's this book called The High Cost of Free Parking by Donald Shoup. I haven't read it, but somebody told me about it. But it's actually a pretty interesting book because what the author argues is that he essentially breaks it down, all the financial data of how the cost of, because somebody has to pay for it. Like, nobody's going to just build a $10,000 per space surface parking lot and that cost not be recouped. So the cost gets passed down, and it's going to get passed down to the consumer in some way, whether it be the cost of how much your unit costs, like how much you're paying in rent, or even at a more least noticed aspect, like if you have a grocery store, you have a surface parking lot that consumes a massive amount of land. That cost of that parking spot gets passed down to the consumer in how much your groceries are marked up.
That's crazy.
And so there's I mean, parking in and itself is a huge challenge, but I to your point, like, that's, I think, also NIMBYism, that's kind of one of their go-to argument too, especially in urban environments, is that it's going to be overparked. They're going to steal our like traffic.
Mm.
I'm not going to have anywhere to park. Um, but it's this kind of push and pull thing.
Yeah, I could see the nobility of NIMBYism just a little bit, but at the same time, I can see the problem with NIMBYism. And so it's kind of like, how do you solve a very nuanced issue in urban design?
So one example of NIMBYism that I've seen a lot is bike lanes. And anytime there's a bike lane, usually bike lanes either reduce a lane of car traffic or vehicular traffic, or it takes over sometimes street parking. And there's always big pushback. They're like, there's never anybody in the bike lanes. Why should I give up my vehicular freedom to go as fast as I want down these empty roads for a biker? Like, and then they get mad when the biker's in the street, right? Because bikers can't be on sidewalks by law. So they're like, wow, this biker's in
I
the
didn't know that.
freaking street and I can't get around him. He's owning the road because we have to share the road. So annoying.
So I would like to say that this is a complete 180. Wait, what is it? 180 from Jamar in college, because I was always the one arguing that there should be less cars. And
Show proof.
as
Where's
Jamar
your
got
receipts?
older,
Where's your receipts? I
because I
don't
didn't
remember
have a
that.
car, Jamar was always the one saying, "Oh, we need more cars. We need more parking space." I remember this distinctly from UVA.
What?
We need more cars.
Wow.
More parking space. So like,
I took the
actually,
bus. I used to walk from Faulkner to the A school. I used to take the bus. I didn't drive. Who had the car first year? Robert did. Robert F. Grooms. I'm not gonna lie, I did get a car because Rob got a car. But if one forgot, I was the
Jamar,
bus
I
driver.
think I think it's well known and well documented that you want to be like me.
Look here.
I think that everybody knows
Look
that.
here. Now you just the coolest dude on the campus because you had a car first year. You breaking laws, you bad boy. That sounds weird, but we're gonna roll with it.
the one thing I would like to say though is that I agree with Perla. It is a double-edged sword where you look at NIMBYism, because I can see why they would want to sort of preserve some aspects of the community and not
Yeah.
have developers just come in and just buy land from people who maybe are struggling financially at a certain point in
Hmm.
time, and then just take advantage of them and build like 50-story building in what's predominantly a single family neighborhood. Um, but then going back to the car thing, where they're closing lanes, there is a problem with that in DC because in DC there's some like roads where there were two lane roads and they close it down to make it a one way, which pushes traffic to the into the neighborhood. So it's like even though you're doing these road diets to reduce
Mhm.
to increase bike traffic or whatever, you're pushing the traffic into the neighborhoods now. So it's like it's not really solving the problem. You're probably creating more problems than you're really solving because kids play in the neighborhood, and if there's more traffic in the neighborhood, there could be more incidents or accidents. So it's like
Mhm.
I can see why they would want to do it to promote more bike lanes, but in cities like DC, New York, you're not going to be seeing many bikes in the wintertime. And then even in the summertime, like when it's hot, I'm not who's biking. It's 100 degrees outside. So I, I see both sides of the argument when it comes to that.
It, well, DC is tough because I personally think that as for a major city, DC has an underwhelming mass transportation network. I think the subway system or the metro in DC, I mean, it's a two rail or yeah, it's a two rail metro system. So it was built in like the 70s. So it was unlike like Chicago and New York, where you have like five and seven rails or whatever it is. It's not necessarily the most efficient. It was really designed to move people from the city to the suburbs, not necessarily a people mover. Um, but I think that again, when you talk about, because I have a point that I want to bring back up, but when you talk about preserving the neighborhood and sort of gatekeeping who or what type of housing or family structures can come into an environment, what you're doing also is you're also kind of voting against your own interests, because if you're able to bring more people into an area, increase the tax base, well, now you're able to actually invest into things like vehicular infrastructure or public transportation, because now you have means to support that economically, and you have the population to justify something like a protected bus lane or protected bike lane. But also, I want to go back to your point that you said, X, how you were agreeing with Perla about understanding the NIMBYism point of view to preserve the neighborhood. It's funny to me that a lot of the NIMBYists are in very progressive leaning cities, and I would argue that most of the people who are on the bandwagon of being an preserving their neighborhood are most likely progressive in their political views. But that one point that you made, that sounds very much like the conservative talking points for immigration and border protection, preserving the 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 culture of the country, protecting the people who protecting against the people who are coming in to disrupt. Um, Again, and I think we're even seeing how some of those immigration policies are against our own interest, in the fact that there is a labor shortage in the construction industry and many other industries that immigrants typically will infuse.
I think I
I stumped you.
disagree. Nah, um,
It's
I would
okay to
stay
say
away
good
from
point.
political.
It's okay to just say good point, Rob.
Nah, I'm thinking about a way. I'm gonna stay away from the political stuff with the immigration stuff, but we can push it in a whole other direction. But um, I okay, so I do agree that progressive. So it's almost like you're saying that progressives are more. They think they're Jane Jacobs, but Jane Jacobs, Jane
No,
Elliott,
Jane Jacobs.
Jane Jacobs.
Yes.
Jane Goodall.
I know Jane Elliott is the one with the blue eye, brown eye thing, right?
Jake Elliott's a
No,
kicker, ain't he?
okay.
Ain't he a kicker for the Philadelphia Eagles? He was? No?
fly
Jane.
Eagles fly.
No. Anyway, Jane Jacobs and what's his name, Robert Moses.
Hmm.
So like maybe they think they're really Jane Jacobs. What you're saying is they think they're just Jane Jacobs, but maybe they're more
Uh,
Robert Moses, where they're
mm-hmm,
creating creating communities or distinctions in their community, sort of gentrifying, keeping boundaries and stuff like that, creating borders. I mean, that's pretty much how it is in DC already with the ANCs. There's
mm-hmm,
ANC 5C and 6C, and
mm-hmm,
and those ANCs really control what happens in those communities. You can't build if you can't really build within that community if the ANC doesn't vote for it.
mm-hmm,
And sometimes the ANC requires you to give them like donations on the
mm-hmm.
Can
side
you explain what the
Oh
ANC
in
wow.
is?
order for stuff to be built. But so ANC is basically, I don't know the acronym, something
Uh,
something community,
I'll
but
tell you. It's area. Let me just look it up.
basically they control the governance of
Advisory Neighborhood Commission.
yeah, so they control what that neighborhood is going to look like. The so like let's say there's potholes in the road, they control um, when or if that's going to be addressed. Let's say there's security, like they need more police. They talk to the police. They go to the police stations and meet with the what do you call those? I can't remember. But anyway, so they basically have they're basically like there's a mayor and then ANC is like
Mhm.
for specific smaller like blocks within a
So
community,
kind of like an alderman,
In
no?
kind of like a
Like an
what?
alderman, no? Like an alderman.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah,
gotcha.
yeah.
what is an alderman? That's in Boston, right?
I don't. I think aldermans are in New York, I believe. I could be
No,
I
making
think
this
but
it's
all
it's
up.
Chicago.
sounding like city council or something for Boston, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. So I think it's unlike an alderman because an ANC is actually made up of neighborhood community individuals, and they are actually elected by their the members that live within that ANC boundary.
I feel like that's an alderman, though. I feel like because so basically on the ballot, there's an ANC on the ballot when you go to vote.
Uh, I don't know how they actually do the vote. I think it's much more
Gotcha.
localized than like
Okay.
citywide
All right. So
voting.
then, yeah, probably not the same
Um,
as alderman.
and it's usually
Oh,
it's usually made up of like 4 to 5 members.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Um, it's
oh.
similar to an HOA
Oh,
board.
we need to talk about that too. But okay, I got it.
Yeah. But the one thing about how like the ANC and zoning works together, because like zoning code is like law, like it's actual written law, and especially in a place like DC, like you have to get approval by the ANC in a sense to sometimes even build by right development. Sometimes depends on if you're asking for specific relief on certain things, even though you're in within your development right. But especially if you're going building something that's against zoning and you have to do like a zoning modification, or you have to do
PUD.
a PUD, a planned unit development, which you're almost at that point you're almost like rewriting the zoning code just for your specific site. There's so many bureaucratic processes that you have to go through, and the ANC holds so much power. I remember I had for a project that I had where we had to get we were it's a by right project, but we were asking for relief for height and stuff like that. Just because of how we had to shift density on the site to protect a historic building. So we had to get ANC approval. And even outside of ANC approval, we had to get like non official ANC groups, but just more like um, grassroots groups and organizations that have affiliation in the community. And I was going around meeting everybody, meeting as much people as I can. And one particular group that I had met this one woman, and like I literally thought of it was like a scene from like The Sopranos, because I was sitting down in her office and she was in her chair rolled, turned around to face me. You know, I want you to build this building, right? I want you to, but I need something from you. Like you just can't get nothing from something for nothing. It was literally like that.
Yeah.
You
No,
tell
hey,
Alicia
chill,
this.
chill. She was talking about parking.
All right,
Chill.
just making sure. This going live.
Chill, man. Why you always starting stuff, man? You talking about parking?
You talking about party? Okay, all right.
Right now.
You said she turned around. I'm just thinking sultry, like.
But it was like the weirdest thing in the world. But it because these groups hold so much power, and sometimes it's good, right? Sometimes you do want the community to be able to control what goes in and out of their community. But I think a lot of times they end up voting against their interest.
Yeah. And I would like to add to that, like, I was talking about how sometimes they require cash incentives, like on the side. Those sometimes those cash incentives don't necessarily re- aren't necessarily reported back to the community. So it's not like
Mhm.
broadcasted that they got this money for the development. And also, when you go to then the office of planning for the final approval, because you can go to the office of planning without a letter from the ANC, but the office of planning then asks, what have we heard from that ANC in order to push the project forward? So if they don't have something from that ANC, they can say, you need to go back to the ANC and talk to the community before you come back to us. And that can delay your project until you get that approved from the ANC. So
Man,
they
sounds like
hold.
you've been going through it.
This man experience. He got
Yeah,
trauma. We trauma bonded
yeah,
down here.
they hold a lot of power. So, I mean, this is
Wow.
pretty much NIMBYism to the 10th degree because
Mhm.
they're pretty much it's pretty much a government position that's you know controlling the community.
Perla, how is it in Boston?
I
I mean,
wouldn't be able to tell you. I'm not gonna lie. I would not be able to tell you.
Aren't you from
I
Boston?
think
Did you grow up there?
Okay, hold on. Da, 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 da. Yes, yes. However, what I will say, I have noticed a difference in terms of like the areas and location down here in the DMV than Boston. So I'm not really sure how they kind of have like a voting or anything of the sorts. Like I'm not even familiar with what X just described. I mean, they probably have a similar process, but I personally refrain from working on multifamily housing for multiple reasons. And that is unfortunately part of that. It's just so layered for people to
mhm.
just find housing. And I don't feel comfortable working on multifamily housing. So I'm not, yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah,
Hmm. Sorry, guys.
You know, so one of the newest proposals that's been in the news recently, maybe only because I'm up the street from it, but the Inner Harbor redevelopment. I mean, there's so much vitriol against the development. I have personal opinions where I think it's great. I think it really elevates the city. You can argue, you can debate about the design. Sure, you can do that, but just in terms of bringing people back to the water, and not only doing it in a way that brings housing and mix of uses and retail and commercial spaces, but you're also greatly improving the park space and like give and creating parks that can also be self sufficient. I think one of the arguments against some of the recreation spaces in Baltimore is that they're not well maintained, and a lot of that has to do with um, the area's ability to do that, right? So, but what's interesting though about the Inner Harbor argument is that again it goes over who does this space belong to. You know, a lot of people don't want to give up their waterfront to outsiders essentially. Um but Jamar, you had mentioned one of an interesting conversation that you had with somebody in passing. that was talking about, oh well, one of the reasons why I don't want, and part of the inner harbor development is also extending the light rail, because right now the light rail in Baltimore goes north to south. So in the plans was sort of talking, envisioning of how the light rail can then extend east to west. And um, go ahead, fill the people in on just kind of like one of that one interesting conversation you had.
Well, first of all, Rob, we need to introduce people to what the Inner Harbor is because a lot of people may not have been to Baltimore. It's a lovely city. So the Inner Harbor is basically
Furley, you know what the inner harbor is?
I remember we discussed it earlier, and I saw like a PDF of
No.
that develop.
exactly,
Point point taken, Jamar.
exactly. You just be jumping in stuff without giving no background. So as the resident Baltimore resident, so basically the Inner Harbor is basically
They don't even say Baltimore. Too
Baltimore.
many syllables.
Baltimore. I live here. Where do you live? Anne
Baltimore,
Arundel County.
Maryland.
But yeah, so the Inner Harbor is basically like the touristy destination, right? At least that's how it has been envisioned for the past 30, 40 years. So it's has two pavilions that used to have shops. Actually, it was my first experience of Baltimore as a young child. We went to an Orioles game, which is not too far from the Inner Harbor, and then we like walked around the harbor, which the Inner Harbor is a very, I think it's the deep, like the natural deep harbor, and it for the longest time. What's that face for?
Oh no.
What does that mean?
It's natural. Like it's not like it wasn't like carved out. Like it just naturally has a naturally deep harbor. Um, shall I continue? So, like I said, long story short, it has this industrial past, but in the '70s, as the city kind of declined, they were trying to figure out ways to revamp the downtown area, and that started with kind of actually pulling from Boston. I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe actually a lot of the inspiration from the Inner Harbor came from the Boston Harbor. There's actually an aquarium in the Boston Harbor that is actually pretty similar, if not damn near the same, in Baltimore. And I've been to both, and they are very similar. They both draw from the same type of architecture. But yeah, so that's kind of like the Inner Harbor background. So the story in passing was with a friend of mine that lives in a different part of the city, and they were saying that they were concerned about the light rail extension with that's kind of accompanying this proposal, which will basically the light rail will run from East Baltimore all the way across to West Baltimore, and we'll kind of connect those two regions because there's a light rail that runs north south, but there's no really east-west connection with public transportation. There's kind of like a slightly northern to western connection, but it's basically a J. That's a subway system that's underutilized, way underutilized. But basically, they were saying that I'm a little concerned about the light rail because of who it might bring into the community. And while I understand the concern, the reality is when you have a car, which Baltimore is a car-centric city, you can still get to the neighborhood with a car. And it's also the bus system here is actually pretty good during rush hour. You can also catch a bus, so it's not like you're in some secluded neighborhood. You do live in a city that anybody can be affected by. Any person, whether you're rich or poor, well off or lesser off, can still get to wherever you live. So I didn't really understand that argument, but that was a form of NIMBYism.
So from the perspective of maybe, so I'm gonna take this perspective of a NIMBYism,
NIMBYist.
NIMBYist. So like a lot of the crimes that are happening today actually happen from people who aren't like driving age. So that 15, 14 to 18 age. So now you kind of give them access to jump the turnstile and come into my neighborhood and rob the corner store. And now the corner store got to close down because, like they steal all their merchandise. And now I got to go 10, 15 minutes out of my way to go to get some groceries.
Actually, okay. You
Actually,
okay?
you can take the blackface off now.
Nah, man. It looked like you about to pull a muscle. You stretching that far, man. I mean, I hear you. I hear that. I don't. I think that's one of those things where it's a very antidotal point, and there's really no like how do you provide data for that? And again, I
Well,
mean
have you
that's a
been to
very
DC?
huh?
DC, all they doing is these kids.
Yeah, but that's a I think that's a larger sort of conversation that
Yeah.
is you can't it's one of those things where you can't pinpoint see because we expanded public transportation and made transportation more accessible for everybody in the city for people of certain social economic classes. That's the reason why my affluent community got robbed or broken into.
I'm not even saying social. I mean, I'm not even talking about the economics. I'm just saying that kids are. I mean,
So
But
I,
like that's why that's the exact reason why Georgetown doesn't have a metro stop, because we don't want to uh, allow black people to have free access to come over into our protected part of the city. And I mean, I guess in some ways it works because Georgetown is still very one of the most highest, most affluent sectors of DC, and it's all about being able to have controlled who is allowed access.
you can also argue that same point about like basketball courts. So I've talked to multiple people who said like I love parks that don't have basketball courts because that's where young black men can't gather, and it's sad because like
Did they say it that
I'm
bluntly?
sorry.
Did they say
All
it
right,
that
they say it
bluntly?
like that, but you got the gist. Because I mean, let's be real. Like, if you say a tennis court, you're not gonna be like, "Oh, actually, you're a young black man who plays tennis." But for the most part, you don't see that many black people playing tennis like that on the regular. But like, that's the argument. They say like, whenever there's a basketball court, there's gang shootouts, there's gang violence. But the reality is, I played basketball all my life at basketball courts. Like, it's a community. And I think actually during COVID, one of the first things that people did when our cities did when they started, at least in my city, they actually
Hmm.
took down the basketball hoops. For what reason? Like you
Yeah,
couldn't exercise. Like during COVID, when you needed to get outside the house or wherever, you had nowhere to go. And so because they are deciding that yeah, we can't have basketball courts, we can't do all these things because we're trying to limit gathering of a certain group of people, now there's no place for them to actually hang out. We don't have the third place for kids to go to because we only have one place and the other. That's work and home. That's school and home. There's no third place for people to gather anymore, and that's why maybe you're seeing the rise of youth, like offenses happening because they don't have a place to gather because of this NIMBYism.
yeah. So to not to go too far off of the original topic and to do a little pivot, pivot to the left Um,
You laugh at your
when
own joke.
No, thank you for doing that, Rob. That put a smile on my
Perla
face.
Perla smiled. She appreciated my
Thank
Beyonce
you.
You've
remarks.
been
Shout out to
you've been dropping a
Beyonce.
lot of
Hmm.
Beyonce
How
and
you like the new album, by the way?
Okay. I
to the left,
I
to the left.
can't.
We're going left.
There are a few songs that I like, but I didn't listen to the whole album.
Mm.
I just can't. It's just something with the banjo and the violin in the same song. I just can't do it.
I was
That's
asking I was asking Alicia this question, and she didn't. She gave me her answer, but I want to really ask a lot of Beyonce people. Do you think the union between Beyonce and Jay Z, who benefited more? Did Jay Z benefit more, or did Beyonce benefit more?
Whitney would love this conversation right now. She would love
I
it.
think. Ugh, dang. If I answer that question, then I wouldn't be doing either of them a service.
it's an easy
Um,
answer. It's
Because
obviously
because
Beyonce.
I don't know
oh
Jay
my
Z.
gosh! Why would you say that?
Well,
See now,
Let me ask you though. Do you think Jay Z at the time when he married Beyonce, before when they were dating, was he considered the greatest rapper alive or one of the top three?
I think so. I mean, well, I don't consider him top three, but um, back so Beyonce came out with her Crazy in Love like '03 area, and Jay Z already had albums out. He was out since the '90s. He was already on top of the rap game by the time Beyonce
And
came
he had
around. So
Rockaware and all those things.
when they linked up together, they did that what are we talking about right now? When they did that, when they did that first song. So like, I'm from New York, so like when Jay Z got with Beyonce, he really elevated her career because she sort of gave her credibility from the Black community side,
Mm,
and also at that point, Aaliyah had passed away recently, so she was really coming into a position when they got to like when they
mm,
made their relationship public, and then from there she kind of like took off from him, but
yeah.
he still earns more money than she does, so
What you gotta say,
it's
Perla?
tough.
What you gotta say? You mad quiet over there.
I'm trying to calm down. Because I disagree.
I mean, Beyonce started rapping because of
I
Jay
was about
Z.
to
Who you
say.
think writing them bars?
Ain't nobody told her to rap. Okay, listen. I'm talking about Jay Z as a see, I can't even speak. First,
See, this is Beyonceism. What?
okay, I don't know rap like that, right? But and I saw ask this as a question: was Jay Z known worldwide?
Yes,
But are you sure, X?
he did a
Ooh, that.
an old
Didn't he? He did the collision course, right?
he did
Before,
what?
didn't he do collision course before
He did
he
a lot
married
of
Beyonce?
like he did a music video in Trinidad before. I think that was before Beyonce
Didn't
or
he?
right around that same time.
When did he do the Punjabi beat? When was that? Was that before Beyonce or was it after?
God, I can't
I
remember.
don't know.
Because like that
Okay,
took off.
I will admit, prior to Beyonce, I did not know who Jay Z was. Okay, Beyonce made Jay Z relevant to me.
Well, there's our answer.
Yeah.
Hey, but we veered way off to the left.
Way
We
No,
went
since
off
we're
road.
so far off, let's talk
Uh,
about Kendrick and Drake and Drake holding his own. But no, let's get back to it.
You said Drake Cole.
Drake is holding his own though. I will give him that. Because J. Cole was like, I'm out. I'm good. Y'all, hey, Kendrick, you good people. And he sat right back down.
I don't take Drake serious no more. A man who gets abs, plastic surgery for abs. He, somebody said he got a 20% body fat, but he got a six pack. How that work?
Look, as much as y'all clown Drake, he is still on top. Like that's one thing I'll say. He is resilient. Like people
On top?
people have been
No.
clowning, but the thing is, like people are throwing shots at him. Why? Because they have a point to prove that he's not on top.
I
Like,
think
why would you
what
give
Drake has
somebody
done.
time of day if they're not on top? If they're a joke to
I
you,
mean, I don't understand how all of the beef originated, but I think what Drake has done well is that he understands social media well. He understands TikTok really well. He understands how to manipulate the algorithms really well. So his music that he makes is for TikTok, and it's TikTok that's selling his music. Now, when you turn like actual like depth of music and artistry, I think he's declined a lot from where he used to be.
Don't worry, TikTok's
Uh,
gonna be banned, and
but
Drake will be
so
irrelevant soon.
Beyonce.
It's fine.
I'm joking. I'm
but
joking. I'm
I
joking.
also saw that Drake also uses algorithms to like he uses specific words that are trending or like are in the algorithm to and makes raps around those. So he's very analytical when it comes to his rap. I would say he's at the top because the other two aren't as consistent as he is. Like he consistently puts out music, so he's always sort of relevant.
So does that mean he's on
Whereas
top of his game then? If he's constantly staying
Because I think
consistent, you like
he's I mean
you can look at it different ways though. You can look at the fact that he doesn't have music that will bump all summer, for example, or bump 2 summers. Like in order to continually be relevant, you have to counteract that with volume.
so who you bumping right
Like
now?
Good Kid, Mad
When's
City
the last time you
still
bumped that?
bumps
When's
for
the last
me.
time you bumped that though?
well, I listened to Fake Love the other day.
The other day. When was the last
From
time
Drake.
before that? Exactly. My point. My point proven. You act like y'all listen to this stuff
I don't know
consistently.
any of these songs.
Well, Jabbar, you don't really count because your favorite rapper is Soulja
My
Boy.
favorite rapper is Will Smith, actually. Will Smith.
Oh,
First of all, you know how hard it is to rap without like cursing? Man, props. Man, I curse in the shower just because. I'm sorry, I keep telling y'all about my shower stuff. I'm sorry. not gonna lie, part of me was like, we still ain't really dive deep on the inner harbor NIMBYism because I know we kind of went off a little bit, but I feel like we didn't really talk about that at all. Like, I don't know.
So go ahead.
I mean, so one of the criticisms that I think Rob was talking about was that basically, I think one of the criticisms that I've constantly heard about the Inner Harbor project is that people feel like the space wouldn't be for them because, like Rob was saying, outsiders would basically they're privatizing the waterfront. Like currently, the way the Inner Harbor is, you have these two pavilions that are public spaces that are for um, shopping, and since the 2000s, that area has declined. There actually used to be a mall across the street from the pavilion that has closed. And so it seems like the waterfront has been basically privatized, or at least it will be privatized because they want to build, I think, and Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they want to build apartments, luxury apartments, an office building that will block current views. And these are tall buildings. I can't remember exactly the heights of it, but one building would be, let's just say, I don't know, 15, 16 stories. Currently, the two
Hmm.
pavilions there are only 2 stories, and the rest of that is green space, right? Green space, paved space, all that stuff. And then the other building will be an office building with some mixed use in there, with some commercial on the
Hmm.
bottom, and then the office above that. And then that would be obviously blocking the views, right? So not only if you go down Pratt Street in Baltimore, you get constant sunshine from the harbor. But once you start to build those high rise buildings, you don't have that same connection or at least viewpoint and access to the water, and so it feels like it's becoming more privatized. Because if you go around the actual inner harbor, there's a lot of private not high rise, but a lot of condos and condominiums with gated communities along that pathway. Um,
Not
if you
really.
go to like the southern part, it's a lot of gated
Yeah,
communities
but
and condos.
but the
The
but
fell side isn't that.
the the area the area of impact for the new Inner Harbor proposal is opposite of where those residential
But
homes
you're
that you're
still
speaking about.
privatizing
So
it for like who will get the views? The people who live in
I
in
mean,
those apartments.
you can argue that for those same gated communities that you're speaking
Exactly. That's
about.
why
Like,
I'm saying that,
yes, the promenade is public, but it very much feels like a private community as you
and that's
walking
why
through,
people are
and those
pushing
views
back
all
against
sound
that,
private.
right? Because they don't want it. They already like most of that harbor walk does feel privatized, right? And so that's why the community is pushing back against because they're like, all right, first of all this money is being spent to drive this development, right? We're a lot of money that and correct me if I'm wrong. I believe the city's kind of helping with a little bit of this in terms of subsidies and incentives. But a lot of that money is not going towards fixing potholes, which is a huge problem. There's a lot of issues with, again, kids not having places or things to do. Schools are underfunded in Baltimore. Um,
Schools aren't really underfunded in Baltimore.
well, it's been
I
it's
think
been
schools.
mismanagement. You're right. You're right.
There you go. There you go.
But there's just so I mean, you can I guess maybe it's also been mismanaged with parks, and I think that's what the point that you were getting to is like that this Inner Harbor project would allow for funding for the park space to be maintained. Is that what you were trying to get at?
I think that one of the issues, yes, yes, and I think one of the issues that downtown Baltimore faces is that in consequence of zoning codes and zoning ordinances, like downtown Baltimore is really just a CBD, a central business district. There is limited amount of housing in downtown Baltimore, and we're in this weird situation where the office market is almost in a really complete collapse. And so there's these vacant office towers that are starting to get converted into housing. There's hotels that have left that are started to getting converted into housing, but there isn't that much there isn't enough of people who live in downtown Baltimore. And my argument that the what the Inner Harbor does is that it brings people back to downtown Baltimore. It brings residential building types back into downtown Baltimore, so that people don't occupy the city downtown more of the time, and not just during the work week, or not just during particular weekends. And I think that what that also does is that not only does it increase the population and brings more resources into the city, but then some of those things that you're speaking about, where there's not a lot of money to fix roads and all of that stuff, but you're increasing the tax base. You're increasing like taxpayers in a particular location that has an ability to make to address some of those things that you've discussed.
So one lecture that I went to that was sponsored by AIA Baltimore recently, they actually talked about different projects. One being the Brooklyn Bridge Park, um, and another one was a park in Houston. By the way, Houston has interesting zoning laws, which we probably should talk about because that's
Houston has no zoning laws.
exactly that's what makes it interesting. And I think maybe that can go in towards the housing part because I think it's a very interesting
Yeah.
topic to talk about. Um, but one of the things that the lecture talked about was that basically, in order to fund the park, the Brooklyn Bridge Park, is that they did need to have some source of income that would help generate and basically maintain that park, and they did that through the use of a hotel, and they did that through I think a other couple of small projects. But the difference between the Inner Harbor project and the Brooklyn Bridge project is that there wasn't such a high density. It was mainly parkland. And it seems
Mm-hmm.
like for the Inner Harbor project, and I think maybe that's why people are pushing back against it. Again, it's just the density that really hasn't been seen, at least on that side of the harbor, right? If you go across the street of Light Street, they have that new apartment building that's, I think, I can't remember what the name
Mm-hmm.
of it is. But like that
Four
doesn't
one
take, I'm
four.
sorry?
414.
Well,
414
yeah,
Light
yeah,
Street.
yeah, yeah. 414 exactly. That project doesn't impede views. Yes, it does give like a lot of at least views for those who want to live in luxury apartments. But you still have that connection to the water that is for public use. Um, but I think that's the biggest difference is that the density and the scale of the project on the Inner Harbor. I think that's what people are pushing against. I could be wrong. Maybe that's just my personal opinion.
Is density and scale bad though?
Yeah, because I was about to say a lot of cities are moving towards more dense cities, and it would make sense that for Baltimore to start from the center of the
But
city and move out, then start from like outside and move in,
but
because they want to bring people back into the city and not because especially a city like Baltimore where they had a history, or like Detroit where they had a history of people moving from the city to the county. Now they're trying to attract people back down to the city, especially in the the more attractive areas of the city.
I think
So it makes sense.
I think the biggest pushback though is that because it is on what used to be for everybody, right? Like again, those pavilions were like food halls, they were shops. Again, like I said, that mall that was across the street from the Inner Harbor that shut down. So things that used to be for the public will now be more privatized versus like okay, a couple of ground floor retail, right? A couple of that,
So
you know.
the pavilions was private. It currently is privately
It's
owned. The
probably owned,
city
but it's
sold.
public space though, right? It's like a regular.
What's the difference between that and what's being proposed?
What's being proposed
I
is
mean, is
housing.
it because
That's the difference.
the city is giving more city owned land to a private developer? And the
Yeah.
reason why the pavilion has went through multiple iterations of trying to revamp and refresh itself, and it's failed time and time again. The mall closed because there's nobody there. Like there's nobody there to patronize the business, like, and especially because the way the inner harbor is essentially separated from downtown by a four or five lane highway. So like you're there's nobody there to help sustain
So
the retail that's
the only reason why I'll push back on that is because the same thing is can be said about the Brooklyn Bridge Park. Granted, again, different density, right? Like you're talking about like a mostly residential neighborhood that's being kind of reconnected to the waterfront, by the BQE, right? Like that's a slightly different story. But there's plenty of land to develop that same tower. Like if you go across the street from the power plant, there's an open parking lot. You can build that same tower on that side and still maintain the access to it's right by Chick Fil A. That parking lot right beside Chick Fil A and Shake Shack. But if you develop on that
Mhm.
land, which apparently is supposed to be developed, there's a sign actually there every day I walk past it that says, "Oh, future development coming." It's not coming because of the whole pandemic and everything. But why does it have to be on the basically? I mean, I know it's private, city owned land, but why does it have to take away from what has already been basically deemed for the public? Is my
because
question.
that doesn't. Go ahead, X.
No, no, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say that doesn't solve the problem of a lack of people living
You can develop
on the water's
you can
edge.
develop on that
Like,
parking lot across the street and still have that density
but how does that solve? How does that solve the pavilions from its issue of not being able to sustain itself?
because you can do
Yeah,
the
I
same
mean,
project. I'm sorry, X. 1 second. You can develop that same project on that same plot of land if you change the zoning, right? Because they're changing the zoning already for this apartment complex, right? They're going to change the zoning for that because they're going to give it that. You can do the same thing in that other part of land, and you can still do the road diet. You can still give more land back to the people, to the harbor walk, without having to block the views that historically has been for the people of Baltimore. That's all I'm saying.
And I'll also argue that that area of land that you're talking about, you're not going to get like 900 units there. And like the issue, to me, the issue isn't necessarily where you develop. It's the fact that what I think what Baltimore needs is actual people moving into the city. Like it needs an infusion of population. And I think that there's this false narrative that, oh, let's just keep it a park. Let's just keep it park space. I've even seen some comments of like, let's remove the pavilions altogether and let's just have an open, free flowing park. And in an area like the Brooklyn Bridge, that makes sense because it can work there because you're just literally have an edge. But as you've described, like with Baltimore being sort of the naturally deep harbor, as you
Look,
put
look.
it, like it actually like the harbor. What's interesting about the harbor is that it actually comes into the city, um and so like you don't have a hard edge, you have a very organic edge in terms of how the harbor interacts with the city. And so in that situation I don't think it works as just a park.
yeah, and also I think the density between Brooklyn and Baltimore is probably very different, especially in that area. Like, I think they could sustain a bigger park probably in the Brooklyn park than in the Baltimore park. But also, cities generally don't like to hold on to land. They like to sell it off because they don't have to maintain that land
Mm-hmm.
because it
Mm-hmm.
costs them more money to maintain the land than it would
Mm-hmm.
to just sell it off and have the developer develop it and take care of it. And a lot of times they actually incentivize or they put in their stipulation that the developer of that property has to maintain the park. So that they're sort of could be just killing two birds with one stone where
Yeah.
they don't have to take care of the property and also they get the developer to maintain that park.
Mm-hmm.
They have nothing to do with it and it's a public park forever,
Mm-hmm.
and that's in the law.
and,
So
and I think cities like Baltimore that struggle with a lot of vacancy and that struggles with population loss, it becomes harder just to maintain the normal functions of a city. Like Detroit, for example, is very similar. And at one point, Detroit couldn't even afford to change the light bulb in the street lights, and it was the owner of the Cavs, Dan Gilbert,
yeah.
who's a Detroit native. He was literally paying for private security to help booster some of the police presence in downtown. He was paying to have services like street lamps replaced, trash emptied, because the city was losing population and could not afford those basic needs because the tax base is gone. And I think that is a similar position that Baltimore is in. Like Baltimore needs a population infusion, and you get that by bringing. I think you bring housing into the city.
So one thing that was really interesting about the lecture too is that they talked about the hotel. So they actually did a study of like, okay, what types of buildings would actually allow this park to be utilized multiple times, like throughout the day. And I think office and residential were on the lower end of their like analysis, and they're like this isn't going to sustain it. It was actually the hotel, and I know granted there's a lot of hotels in Baltimore, but they were saying like a hotel and I think mixed use or something like that. I can't remember exactly what they went with, but it obviously it was what they ended up settling with when they actually finished the master plan and actually finished out the project. But it's again, I even though I love bringing up Brooklyn Brooklyn Bridge Park, it is a different situation because again, Baltimore does have a plethora of hotels on the Inner Harbor, and it still hasn't worked. And I do think it needs to be infused with more housing. But again, when a city that has a plethora of land and a plethora of houses available for people to rehabilitate and everything, it just seems like what will actually really fix it? I don't know. But it needs something.
It's like the chicken or the egg kind of approach. But I mean, even X had brought up earlier, it's hard to start on the out start. It's hard to start adding density on the edges before you move in. I think you do have to move. You have to build from the inside out. But we are going past time. This was actually a real good
Wait,
discussion.
brother has
I
something to
also want to
say?
let you know, Jamar,
No, I
you're not
don't. I
slick,
don't know.
Jamar.
I don't know what you're. I mean, I haven't even been in the area that you guys are talking about.
Oh, you shot your child. Poor thing.
I want to say you're not slick, Jamar. I know what you did.
Look, bro, we
I
was
know what
already
you
running
did.
up on like 10. We had 10
I,
minutes left.
look, for y'all listening, I told everybody before we started, like, hey, we're gonna talk about this, and then I'm gonna go
Well,
ahead and
look,
pivot to this tiny home. Jamar was like, I want to talk about tiny homes on a separate episode, so he personally
but to be honest, you didn't
sabotaged
do a good
my
job of talking
plan.
about NIMBYism. I'm gonna bring up the Inner Harbor and then just dropped it to talk about Beyonce.
Yeah,
That's not a waste of time, though. Okay.
Beyonce discussion was wild. I didn't think it would go that far, but
Yeah, that was at least
nonetheless,
10 minutes.
it's a good episode. Thank y'all for tuning in. Thank you for joining us on the stoop as always, and love to hear your feedback on this. Love to hear your feedback on what you felt about the discussion, even your position on Beyonce, Jay-Z, who benefited from the union.
Who
Uh,
upgraded who?
I see. I like it. I see what you did there. Let me upgrade you. And until next time, talk to y'all later. Peace.
Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye. Hey, everybody. Thank you for listening to this episode of AutoBlack. If you have enjoyed the discussion, please hit that subscribe button or follow button, whatever you'd like. AutoBlack is a discussion-based podcast that is unapologetically Black at the intersection of design and culture. We acknowledge that our experiences are just that, our experience, but your voice is worth elevating and your perspective is valid. So please join the conversation and connect with us on Instagram at AutoBlack_podcast or email us your thoughts, comments, and even future topics you'd like us to discuss on the stoop at AutoBlackPodcast@gmail.com. AutoBlack out. Bye!